Isn't it wild that a survival based childhood can actually teach an individual, any given individual, to be inauthentic, to be non congruent with who they actually are? When a child is raised in survival, essentially what happens, and it's not the same for everybody, it changes person to person, it's different person to person, but essentially what happens is that a child is taught to not be in touch with themselves, not be in touch with their intuition, not be in touch with their own sense of authenticity. Actually, the scariest thing about this is that they develop in a way that actually has them exceedingly and severely out of touch with who they actually are. Because, say, for instance, if you grow up and you learn to say yes when what it is that you want to say is actually no, you're getting further and further away from yourself. If you grow up and you learn that you're interested in something that you're actually not interested in, simply because you learned that you needed to be interested in that thing to survive such a painful childhood, what is that doing to a person? That's getting them exceedingly out of touch with who it is that they actually are. Say, for instance, as a child, you're really interested in art. It doesn't matter what type of art it is. But what matters is that you're really interested in art and you're raised by people that think that that's stupid. And they also fill you with ideas that you're never going to be successful in that area, or you're just never going to be seen as a person in that area. And instead, they suggest for you to be, I know that it sounds stereotypical, but they suggest for you to be a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, whatever the hell it might be. And no shade thrown at any of those fields. Whatever you want to do with your life, you want to do with your life, and that's fine. This video, the theme of this video, is really about presenting that a lot of people from a survival based childhood never got out of that. And instead of actually getting in touch with themselves and their own sense of authenticity, they just remained in a fight, flight, freeze, fawn structure where they're not in touch with what it is that they actually want. What it is that they say yes to is based in their survival based childhood. It's rooted in their survival based childhood, and they're not actually doing what they want to do with their lives. They were taught that if they want to be seen, if they want to be understood, if they want to be appreciated, if they want to be loved, if they want to be supported, they have to do X, Y, and Z. Now, the X, Y, and Z that they've been taught that they have to do in order to receive that is not what they actually want to do. So they instead enter this mode where they're doing a bunch of things that they don't actually want to do. That leaves them out of touch with who they actually are. Of course, it would. Say, for instance, if I actually had a desire to be something other than what it was that I turned out to be in my adulthood, and don't get me wrong, it can totally change. Like what it is that you wanted, like what it is that you actually wanted in childhood could be different from what it is that you want in adulthood. This, in my opinion, tends to be less likely depending on if you have a healthier childhood, because the healthier that your ego state development gets in childhood earlier on, the better chance it is that you're going to actually not only know who you are, but pursue what it is that you actually want into adulthood. But for those that were raised in survival based childhoods where they had to wear masks, they had to appease, they had to throw out the paintbrushes and the canvases and all of the paints and all of their dreams and all of their ideas and all of their creative flow to put on these suits that they don't actually want to because they don't actually want to be a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer or, you fill in the fucking blank. It doesn't matter what it is. They simply did not want it, but they learned over time that they had to wear these masks because what they really wanted was the external thing. So here's the fascinating thing: the survival based childhood taught the individual to put themselves out there rather than determining themselves. So they put themselves out there to hopefully be determined by other people, which is very unstable. That is the extrinsic self-worth. They learn to put their self-worth out there because their self-worth is tied to their parents and what their parents think of them. Their self-worth is tied to their occupation and what their job does for them, what their job title does for them, what their status does for them. It's very unstable. It's very shaky. The healthy childhood was the parent validating, approving of, accepting and loving the child, and then the parent at some point early on transitioning to teach the child how to do that for themselves. That's the healthy childhood. The unhealthy childhood was where the child had to be in survival to survive, had to wear all these masks, had to appease, had to people please, had to become inauthentic, had to become somebody other than who it was. Who it was not accepted back then. So it had to go into survival mode and do all these defenses and wear all these masks and appease and fawn and shut down and freeze. Now imagine that in adulthood, or from here to here, right? Because that's the progression. Imagine that in adulthood. Imagine being a full-grown adult but still living in survival. It's not good or bad or right or wrong. It's just not healthy. And you can do whatever you want to. You absolutely can. You have free will. But as a full-grown adult, why would you choose that route? I'm just curious. Why would anybody choose that route? No shame at all. You can do you. You can do whatever it is that you feel is necessary for you. But what I'm here to present is this idea that you're no longer in survival. You're now here in adulthood. You can free yourself from all of these ideas, all these beliefs that you have to wear these masks, you have to be somebody other than who you are in order to be accepted, in order to be approved of, in order to be loved, in order to be validated. And also, why would you sweat it so much and lose so much sleep over stuff like that? All of this external stuff that you're tied to, when you could actually instead cut the strings of those external extrinsic self-worth attachments and realize that you can actually give it to yourself. How fucking wild is that? Imagine cutting all of these strings that stress you the fuck out because your self-worth is tied to all of these things extrinsically, and instead bring it back to yourself. Determine yourself, validate yourself, approve of yourself, love yourself, appreciate yourself, accept yourself. Understand that you are an individual and you are with that separate from all of these other systems, whether it's your family, your friends, whatever, groups at school, your professor, whoever it is that you look up to and looking up to in and of itself, idolizing people. People are just people. You don't need to idolize anybody either. There's nobody better or worse than you. You're just a human. And realizing that there's nobody out there that's better than you. So if you tied your self-worth to somebody out there that you've seen as better than you, you can see it for what it is and realize that they're just human too. You don't have to give so much power to them. Nobody's better than you. Nobody's also worse than you either. You're a human and they're a human. Nobody's more or less human than you. You are no more or less human than anybody else. And so I hope that paints a very clear picture in how much it can transform your life if you untie all of those strings that have been tied to other people. And instead recognize that, oh, wait a second, you've been doing a bunch of things that you don't want to do because you've been living in adulthood still as childhood's survival-based dynamic. Appeasing, people pleasing, wearing all these masks, doing things that are not authentic to you because you were taught that you had to in order to survive. You were taught that you had to literally become somebody else in order to survive. You don't have to do that anymore. You can absolutely continue to, but you don't have to. And understanding that letting go of that dynamic will literally transform your life. Like, imagine you were to wake up. I kind of said this in yesterday's video. Imagine you were to wake up to realize that throughout your entire life, you've been living in your survival-based childhood that is now expired. It's been expired for a long time. And you've been doing a bunch of things that you never wanted to, only because you thought you had to do them in order to be loved, in order to be validated, in order to be approved of, in order to be appreciated, in order to be supported. All then to realize that you've just been trying so hard to get these things from people that are not healthy because they actually violate your boundaries. Anybody that does not allow you to be who you are is violating your boundaries. How does that sound? How does that feel? Imagine somebody pressures you to be somebody other than who you are. How does that feel? It's fucked up. That's not a healthy dynamic. You deserve healthy relationships. You deserve to do what it is that you actually want to do with your life. And understanding, like really embodying the reality that you don't have to wear all these masks. You don't have to do all these things that are not authentic for you, that don't align with your intuition. You can say no and not feel any guilt or shame for it. And anybody that tries to put you in that space of guilt or shame, fuck them. They're not healthy for you. I can imagine that nobody would want to get to, I'll leave it off at this, really. I can imagine that nobody would want to get to 70, 80, 90, even 100 years of age and look back and be like, wow, I spent my entire life just as a massive child. And it's no shame. You can do whatever you want to. I'm not trying to shame anybody here. I'm just trying to paint a picture metaphorically. You get to 90 or 100 years old, 100 years of age, and you look back and you're like, holy shit, I pretty much stayed a child because my childhood had me discovering that I had to be somebody else in order to achieve all of these things that I desire so much. Unless you learn that you can just take all your power back and not tie your self-worth to things out there and instead just determine yourself. Yeah, there's that option as well. And that option is actually healthy. Because imagine living a life, an entire life of decades of doing things that you don't want to do, not doing what you do want to do, simply because you want something from somebody out there. In case nobody told you, this is really important to understand. I'll end off with this. Nobody else, not a single other person on the face of this fucking planet, has the answer to your life. Nobody. And if you've given that power to other people, when you take it back on yourself and stop trying to get that from other people, when you actually give it to yourself, when you stop seeking it in other people and you give them that much power, when you take it back on yourself, fuck, your life transforms like fucking crazy in ways that you can't even imagine right now, but you will see in the future if you implement that.